Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Monster Monday. Just taking a few minutes here to get stuff all set up. As always, the music tonight is courtesy of Streambeats. Streambeats is copyright-free music made by streamer Harris Heller of Alpha Gaming fame and for streamers and for content creators. You can use Streambeats in your live streams and your YouTube videos, and you'll never get a copyright strike against it. He's got tons of artists, tons of creators that are making music in all kinds of genres. Makes great background music or great break and pre-show music for your streams. Also, as always, want to give a big shout out to Mo over at the Tabletop Bellhop. Mo is the OG when it comes to all things tabletop games. Party games, board games, card games, classic games, new games. If you can play it on a tabletop, Mo has all the information you want about it over at the tabletopbellhop.com, including an entire galaxy of media creators that are creating streams, podcasts, and other content all around board games. So like I said, we'll get started at the top of the hour. Tonight's topic is the fire giant. Looking at the history of that monster throughout the editions of D&D. So if you have any questions, throw those into the chat. Towards the end of the show, we always have a Q&A, and we will try our best to answer your questions on those. 2 minutes. 2 minutes until we start. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Monster Monday. My name is DM Gallibond, and tonight is June 7th, 2021. And here on Monster Monday, we are going to be looking at the history of the fire giant throughout all of the editions of D&D. This is one of the monsters that has been with us since the very beginning of the entire game, and has consistently shown up throughout various editions. And it's also a monster that has a rich history in different specific modules, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. All right, so we said it a little bit before during the introduction, but just want to throw a big shout out to Mo over at the tabletopbellhop.com. He is the OG for all things tabletop games. So if you love tabletop games, go ahead and check him out. All right. Tonight's monster is the fire giant, and this is a depiction of a fire giant from the 2nd edition Monster Manual, or Monstrous Manual, I should say, because that's what they called the book in that edition. Going back to the very beginning of the game, basic D&D, we have this description of the monster. These giants have red skin and dark black hair and beards. They are 16 feet tall and wear copper, brass, or bronze armor. Fire giants usually make their home near volcanoes or other equally hot places. And their castles are often made of black baked mud reinforced with crude iron. And then in 1st edition, or AD&D, fire giants are very broad, about 6 feet across the shoulders, looking almost like dwarves. Their skins are coal black, their hair is flaming red or bright orange, and eyes are deep red. Their teeth are usually yellow-orange. They wear armor or dragon hides, and they favor huge swords. Now, notice that in original or basic D&D, the fire giants had red skin and black hair, and in AD&D, they had black skin and flaming red or bright orange hair and red eyes. Now, in 2nd edition, the edition that this image comes from, they are tall but squat, resembling huge dwarves. An adult male is 18 feet tall, has a 12-foot chest, and weighs about 7,500 pounds. So fire giants have coal black skin, flaming red or bright orange hair, and prognathous jaws that reveal dirty ivory or yellow teeth. and they can live to be as much as 350 years old. So this monster has been around for a long time, but you can see it takes them quite a while to figure out, well, exactly what do these guys look like. Every edition we get changes to the way they look. And to emphasize that, well, here is an image of the fire giant from the current edition, from 5th edition. And it's kind of interesting not only to look at the description of the monsters, but to look at their lore. Okay, so, and what I usually like to do, I like to go back to the early editions to look at the description, and then for the lore, look at what's current and work my way backwards. So, Fire Giant lore, they are martial experts. From birth, Fire Giant is taught to embrace a legacy of war. At the cradle, its parents chant songs of battle. As children, Fire Giants play at war, hurling igneous rocks at one another across the banks of magma rivers. And in later years, formal martial training becomes an integral part of life in the giants' fortresses and underground realms of smoke and ash. And the Fire Giants' songs are odes of battles lost and won, while their dances are martial formations of pounding feet that resound like smiths' hammers throughout their smoky halls. Now that comes from the current edition from 5e. And now in 4th edition, we learn Fire Giants seek to forge new empires. They remember the giant empires of old and want to rekindle their ancient glory. Fire Giants take slaves, using them as laborers in their forges and strongholds. They also keep hellhounds as pets. And that comes from 4th edition. And then from 3rd edition, we learn Fire Giants dwell only in hot places. They prefer volcanic regions or areas with hot springs. They live in well-organized military groups, occupying large castles or caverns. Tribal leaders refer to themselves as king or queen. Fire Giants usually engage in ongoing military campaigns to subjugate the areas around them and often receive tribute from creatures living nearby. So these among all of the giants, Fire Giants are among the more industrious and definitely the most militaristic of the lot. Okay, every creature in D&D, especially in 5th edition and in earlier editions as well, they all have a creature type, and the creature type has some usual characteristics and also sometimes applies as a keyword for certain abilities or spells or things like that. So the creature type for the Fire Giant is unsurprisingly a giant. And giants tower over humans and their kind. They're human-like in shape, though some have multiple heads or deformities. 6 varieties of true giants are hill giants, stone giants, frost giants, fire giants, cloud giants, and storm giants. And besides these creatures, such ogres and trolls are also considered giants. So, Fire Giants are among the 6 true varieties, and those 6 true varieties kind of make up a spectrum of different types. There's a core 4, the fire, the stone, the frost, and the cloud, and those 4 basically relate to the 4 fire, frost, fire, frost, stone, and storm giants. Those 4 relate to the elemental planes of existence. Fire obviously being fire, and then stone being earth, frost being water, and cloud being air. And then you have just kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum, you have the truly dumb brutes of the hill giants, and then the storm or the cloud giants, on the far side of the spectrum. Those are like super spellcasters. They're the ones that have the levitating castles, and everything they do is kind of magically based. But they're also, of course, very powerful and very strong. They're not weak little wizards there. But they are masters of arcane magic, as well as being giants. So it's kind of a nice spectrum that they have built with giants in D&D. All right, now we're going to go to the part of the show where we look at the mechanical features of fire giants throughout the ages, and or throughout the different editions of the game. And to do this, we will start by going all the way back to the Rules Cyclopedia, which collects all of the rules for the original D&D game. And in their Rules Cyclopedia, they include all of the monsters. And so for giants, they have all of them collected together. The fire giants, they have an armor class of 4, which is common for most of the giants. They're 11 plus 2 hit dice. They didn't have challenge ratings back then. They basically, the toughness of the monster was determined by the number of hit dice they had. They attack with 1 weapon for 5d6 damage. So their big swords will do anywhere from 5 to 30 damage. They save as an 11th level fighter. They have an intelligence of 13, and they are chaotic in alignment. Now, and this is kind of where we got the description for their from the basic edition is out of this resource. Now, another thing that that's interesting to note about them is that they always have either 1d3 hydras, 20% chance, or 3d6 hellhounds, 80% chance as guards. And it also notes that these giants are not affected by fire-based attacks. And that's another thing about the 4 types of giants that correspond to the elemental planes, is that they are immune to attacks from that particular plane. So fire giants are immune to any kind of fire damage. Now, also from this edition, from the basic edition of the game, there's a resource that is called the Bestiary of Dragons and Giants, and this one gives a little bit more lore and information on giants, and also has different adventures that are scaled for parties of different levels that feature these enemies. So you can see very, very early on they were looking at trying to get some of the iconic monsters that are part of D&D into their different adventures. So it gives you a nice little thing here for the DM on the art of DMing giants. There are many types of giants in a different climate and habitat, but the ultimate goal of every giant is to achieve immortality, and only through perfection can they gain a higher status. So giants live in small family groups in wilderness areas, and that's because every giant family uses up a lot of resources, and twice a year, remote areas at different times, large bands of giants get together to celebrate the year, gain and share knowledge, renew their oaths of allegiance to their leaders. And so there's anywhere from 50 to 200 giants of all ages, and then there's something that's very interesting that they talk about with fire giants, is that they have a fire giant fair. There's commonly 35 warrior males, 20 females with more ladylike weapons, and 15 children of all ages. Each family shows off their favorite hybrid or hellhound who serves to protect their belongings. The valley where they meet is by an active volcano, protected year-round by a high wall the giants have erected around the valley, and by an honor guard of 5 bachelor fire giants. And the fire giant leader rules over the tribe, must have slight magical abilities, and acts as the tribe's clerical elder. So this is kind of an interesting little tidbit about the fire giants, something that you could choose to work into your game, and it's just sort of a little bit of esoteric knowledge. Now, also out of this same particular resource, there is a 3-page adventure, which I'm not going to go through, but it's called The Feud of the Fire Giants, and basically the story revolves around fire giants and hill giants, and how the party could side with perhaps the less capable and more victim, if you will, in this case, hill giants, against the meaner and more aggressive and more militaristic fire giants. And then there's also some internal politics within the fire giant clan going on. All right, so, but the thing I want to focus on out of this particular adventure is this little sidebar at the end on fire giants. So it's common knowledge that the larger the giant, the more intelligent, and fire giants are fairly smart, needing technical knowledge in order to forge weapons. Fire giants might be called a large version of the dwarves, though either race would take offense to such comparison, because dwarves hate giants and giants hate dwarves. Feeling very mutual there. So there's many tribes within a fire giant society, many clans within a tribe. Clans are based on profession or metalsmithing specialties. So now, again, this is something that you can use in your game if you want to as a DM. You can say, like, okay, if there's a whole area where there's fire giants, where you're going to have the silversmiths over here, and the goldsmiths over there, and the ironsmiths over here, and the ones that work copper over there, and all this other kind of stuff. So, weapon masters, armorers, tinkers, smiths are the prominent specialties. Other clans may include warriors, hunter-gatherers, and builders. And then their lairs can be anything from a castle of black mud to a cave featuring latent volcanic activity. Those who live in actual buildings are usually more organized and well-off than their cave-dwelling brethren. And they're greedy, prizing nothing more highly than gold. Use gold in their metalworking. The more gold, the more important the giant. They love gems that have a reddish cast, such as rubies. Greed rivals that of the dwarves, only serves to give them one more thing to fight over with dwarves. They also love the art of making traps and create clever mechanical traps to guard their jealously hoarded gold. Now, there's a note here about the weapons, which I think is kind of interesting. It's probably not practical for most people's campaigns, but I think it's interesting. So human-sized creatures cannot use fire giant forged weapons. Weapons are balanced for giants and unwieldy in smaller hands. Damage and encumbrance of these weapons is also different from the human proportion norm, as can be seen in the following table. So a fire giant battle axe will do 4d6 damage, and it weighs 600 coins. Well, how much is 600 coins? In 5e terms, that would be 60 pounds, because it's 10 coins to a pound. A hammer will do 3d6 and weighs 40 pounds. A mace, again, 3d6, weighs 40 pounds. A polearm will do 5d6 and weighs 100 pounds. A spear, 3d6 and weighs 40 pounds. A two-handed sword weighs 5d6 and weighs 100 pounds. And a long sword does 4d6 and weighs 60 pounds. So, if you're unhappy with the amount of damage that giants deal in 5th edition, you can always feel free to go back to older editions and just take the damage things. And also, if some smart aleck in your party wants to know how much a giant's polearm weighs, say, oh, it weighs about 100 pounds. Let's see. What's your strength? Can you lift that? Oh, wizard? No, you can't even lift that. So that would just sort of that sort of gives you some way as a DM to just sort of put the kibosh on nonsense that your players want to do. If you're that kind of DM and you want to do that, sometimes your players will have really interesting ideas, and it's fun to play along with them. And sometimes they just have dumb ideas, and you gotta nip it in the bud. All right. Then also from the same source, There's one other little tidbit about fire giants that I think is interesting, and it actually comes under the heading of cloud giants. So, eons ago, when giants ruled the earth, the cloud giants, which were known as Brobdingnags, dwelled in a lush valley and deep forests. As the number of giants grew, land and resources became scarce, and wars became inevitable. The Brobdingnags soon found themselves locked in a fierce struggle with the more numerous Gundarim, which were later known as the Fire Giants. Though there were heavy casualties both sides, the Gundarim eventually managed to shatter the Brobdingnag capital, forcing the surviving Brobdingnags to seek refuge in the high mountains. Okay, so now that's just a little bit there, and of course, those of you who remember your high school English classes may recall that Brobdingnag, or the Brobdingnagians, were one of the groups of people that Gulliver met in his Gulliver's Travels. All right, so now we're going to move on to first edition, AD&D. And fire giants here, they have an armor class of 3, hit dice 11 plus 2 to 5 hit points. They have 1 attack. The damage per attack is 5d6. And their special attacks are hurling rocks for 2d20 or 2d10 hit points each. Their intelligence is average, and they're 12 feet tall. So they're often found in castles as in caverns, found in their lair, 25% likely to have hellhounds, largest one, of the largest size as watchdogs. And then adult fire giants there will hurl rocks from 10 feet to 200 feet in distance, inflicting 2d10 hit points, and they can catch those missiles 50% of the time. They are impervious to fire, even that of red dragon's breath. All right, then in second edition, we know this image here we've seen that so far. Their armor class is -1. Now, something to remember in the older editions, all the way up through second edition, the lower the armor class, the better. So, in basic D&D, they had an armor class of 4, which is pretty good. AD&D, an armor class of 3, which is a little bit better. And now, by second edition, they have an armor class of -1, which is really good. And they have become from 11 hit dice monsters. They're now 15 plus 2 to 5 hit point. 15 hit die plus 2 to 5 hit point monsters. They have 1 attack, and their damage per attack is 1d8 or by weapon, which is 2d10 plus 10 damage. And then they hurl rocks for that 2d10. And their defenses, they resist fire. Now, this is a thing that some of the editions they change up a little bit how they deal with elemental style damage. And in second edition, when it says resistant to fire, usually that means that it will resist up to a certain hit point amount, and then it will take any damage over that. In 5th edition, resistance means it just takes half damage. Okay, and so I'm just trying to see if it says here what it talks about. I don't think it specifies in here what their resistances are or how much they resist. Okay, they're immune to non-magical fire and heat, as well as red dragon breath, resistant to all types of magical fire, such as attack. Okay, there we go. Resistant to all types of magical fire, such attacks inflict -1 hit point per die of damage. So yeah, all normal fire won't affect them, and then if you do magical fire like a fireball, if it's an 8d6 fireball, then you just subtract 8 from the damage you deal to it, basically. Then the warriors favor huge two-handed swords, and they do double normal damage to all opponents, plus a giant strength bonus. And fire giants often capture and tame other creatures as guards. Will contain 1 to 4 hellhounds, and then they'll have trolls. And a king's group has 1 to 2 red dragons of age category 2 to 5. And I think in this edition, dragons had 12 age categories. So 2 to 5, they're still pretty young dragons. All right. Whoops. I did. Okay. All right. Fire Giant in 3rd edition is 15 d8 plus 75 hit points. The armor class is 23. This is where we get to the normal armor class. So an armor class of 23 is pretty hard to hit. Base attack is plus 11. The great sword attack is plus 20, and it'll do 3d6 plus 15 damage. The rock attack is plus 10, and it deals 2d6 plus 10 plus an additional 2d6 fire damage. Because in this edition, they always soak their rocks in lava before they hurl them at their opponents. And that makes them deal fire damage as well as bludgeoning damage. And then they're brutal, ruthless, and militaristic. They have bright orange hair and a chest that measures 12 feet around, weighs 7,000 pounds. Fire giants wear sturdy cloth or leather garments colored red, orange, yellow, or black. Warriors wear helmets and half-plate armor of black and steel. And then they heat rocks in a nearby fire geyser or lava pool, so they deal extra fire damage. And they dwell only in hot places. They prefer volcanic regions or hot springs. And all right. Then we have all of the information about them taking slaves and whatnot. Now, in 4th edition, we get actually 3 variations on the fire giant. And we will talk about them. So this is kind of an interesting... 4th edition mechanically is very different from all the other editions, but thematically 4th edition usually can give you some good ideas as a DM of how to sort of give different variations on a typical monster. So the fire giant, the normal fire giant, is a large elemental humanoid giant, and is a level 18 soldier, armor class 34, 174 hit points with a bloody value of 87, and its Searing Greatsword is a plus 23 attack, plus 6. It deals 1d12 plus 6 damage, plus an additional 2d8 fire damage. Then a Sweeping Sword is a standard attack. Close Blast 2 deals 1d12 plus 6 damage, plus 2d8 fire damage. And then an Iron Javelin is a range of 75 feet normal range or 150 feet long range. It's 1d10 plus 6 damage, and the target is slowed until the end of the fire giant's next turn. Then we have the fire giant Forge Collar. And the Forge Collar is the one who's kind of the spellcaster among the fire giants. So they're also level 18 artillery, 136 hit points, armor class of 32, a smoldering mace, which again does bludgeoning damage and fire damage, Fire Pillar, which is a spell attack, and then Flame Burst, which is a recharging magical attack. And then last but not least, we have the Fire Titan, which is a huge elemental humanoid, level 21 elite soldier with 398 hit points, an armor class of 39, resist 30 fire. And these other guys have resist 15 fire. So what this means in 4th edition with the resist, if you attack this thing with a fire spell, you need to do at least 31 damage in order to do any damage to it. If you do 30 or less damage, then it doesn't take any damage from that fire attack. Fire Raging Greatsword is plus 26. It deals 2d6 plus 9 plus an additional 4d6 damage and pushes the target 10 feet away. It can make a double attack. It can hurl lava. It's a recharging ability. And range is 100 feet. Plus 24 versus reflex. 4d6 plus 6 fire damage and immobilizes the target till the end of the Titan's next turn. And then there's a Burning Wave, which is a close burst out in all directions. Plus 24, 2d10 fire damage, and ongoing 10 fire damage save ends. And so that is the Fire Giant in 4th edition. Well, now we get to the modern Fire Giant. Fire Giant here in 5th edition. Armor class is 18, hit points 162. And Speaks Giant, makes 2 greatsword attacks, which are plus 11 and 66 plus 7 slashing damage. Now note that there's no heat damage from the sword in this edition. And the rock is a plus 11 to hit and deals 4d10 plus 7 bludgeoning damage, and again deals no heat damage. Alright, so it talks about how they are Fire 4, or they're master crafters and organized warriors. They dwell among volcanoes, lava flows, and rocky mountains. Their fortresses are built around and inside volcanoes or near magma-filled caverns. Blistering heat of their homes fuels the Fire Giant's forges and causes the iron of their fortress to glow a comforting orange. So that means that if you go anywhere near a Fire Giant stronghold and you don't have fire resistance, you're probably taking damage every round you're there. Fire Giants shun cold as much as their cousins, the Frost Giants, hate heat. They can adapt to cold environments with effort, though, keeping their hearth fires burning bright and wearing heavy woolen clothing and furs to stay warm. Now, the one thing that's interesting in 5th edition, and really it's kind of consistent, it doesn't talk about it much in earlier editions either, is there's not vulnerability to cold attacks for Fire Giants. And in 5th edition, that's pretty consistently a thing. It's very rare that you will find elemental-based creatures that are immune to one type of damage and yet are vulnerable or take extra damage from another elemental type. Those kind of monsters are very few and far between. It's more common in older editions, but again, it doesn't seem to be a thing that really affects the giants that much. Alright, as we said, they're martial experts, and their renowned fighting prowess comes from endless discipline and training. And then they are feudal lords. Humanoids conquered in war become serf to Fire Giants. Fire Giant crafters work through insight and experience rather than writing and arithmetic. Most Fire Giants place little worth on such frivolousness. They sometimes keep slaves at court who are versed in such skills. And the Fire Giants low in the ordning manage to mine tunnels and slaves that toil there, few of which survive difficult and dangerous work for long. And they are skilled artisans. They have fearsome reputation as soldiers and conquerors. Their ability to burn, plunder, and destroy. Yet among the giants, fire giants produce the greatest crafters and artists. Excel at smelting and smithwork as they do at engineering of metal and stone. Quality of their artistry shows even in their implements of destruction and their weapons of war. So again, this is another kind of clue for a DM. If you want to bring the party face to face with like an atypical giant, you might have a pacifist fire giant that has sort of embraced the crafting and artistic side of their nature and could potentially be an ally to the party in terms of, being able to craft really wonderful stuff. That would obviously be for a high-level campaign where you would expect to be running into these types of creatures, but that's kind of another interesting sort of twist on a giant that you could do. And by having a giant in there, that could give you a whole bunch of other threads they could pull on, the party could pull on, that could lead to additional adventures through that NPC. All right, that is part of their of the campaign in which they are operating. Okay, let's go back and take a look at using fire giants in encounters. Now, this is a depiction of fire giants out of the 4th edition D&D. What I always look for is I look at how to try to create a hard or challenging encounter with one of these creatures pitted against 5 PCs of a given level. And if you want to create a hard encounter for a party of 5 PCs with a single fire giant, you can throw a fire giant at a level 5 or 6 party. That would be hard. If it's below level 5, it's going to be considered deadly. A skilled party of organized players that work well together could probably survive at 4th level, but definitely 3rd level and below, it just would be a bloodbath. Then if you bump the party's level up to 7 or 8, it becomes a medium encounter. And if you want to make it a hard encounter for an 8th level party, add 1 hellhound along with the fire giant, and that will make it a hard encounter. And then a single fire giant will be an easy encounter for a level 9 through 12 party. And if you want to make that a hard party, you can a hard encounter for a level 12 party, you could either add 1 fire giant or you could add 4 hellhounds to make it a more challenging combat for a 12th level party. All right, and then here's sort of the fire giant scale of size. You have the fire giant over here. This is from 3rd edition. Then in the middle, you have the storm giant. In the right, you have the frost giant. And then peeping here in the middle, you have a normal human. So if you are a player and your party encounters fire giants, here's a few things to keep in mind. And this is considering you're fighting them in 5th edition. So fire giants are immune to fire, period. So don't try to use any haste-based attacks against them. They're not spellcasters, but they can hurl huge boulders up to 240 feet or 60 feet without disadvantage. So you need to be alert for that. And the best tactic to take against a fire giant or any giant for that matter is just try to immobilize them with some magical effect and then unleash your most powerful attacks to try to destroy them while they can't fight back. That's just kind of really the safest way to attack any kind of giant, is keep it from being able to fight against you. That's just the best way, because if it can fight against you, there's very little chance you're going to be out of the range of its attacks. You can get, with moderate spells, you can get out of the range of its effective ranged attacks, but there's not many spells in the wizard or cleric spell book that have a range further than 240 feet. So, all right, now, if you're using fire giants as a DM, here's a few things to keep in mind. Fire giants are greedy and manipulative and very skilled artisans. They're domineering slaveholders and they're brutal warriors. So also allow the fire giant to use its environment to its advantage. So if the fire giant is encountered in the wilderness, perhaps it will be near a hot mud spring or a lava flow that it can use to hide in or to hurl devastating attacks at the party. Because remember, they're immune to fire, so it would treat a, flowing river of magma, it would treat that like a swimming hole. And it could just dive right in and swim in the magma. Now, obviously, the humans and the elves and the dwarves that are chasing the giant and fighting the giant, they can't go in that lava. And if they are near lava, imagine that the fire giant creates a lava ball, similar to a snowball, by scooping up some liquid lava, forming it into a ball until a cool crust forms around it, and then hurls that at the party. So you could use that and say that does the same damage as a rock that it hurls, but then you can also go back and look at some of the added heat damage from earlier editions and say, because this is going to be a ball of lava that splits open and splatters its target with molten lava, it's also going to get to do some fire damage in addition to the bludgeoning damage. And maybe it has a splatter radius. So, if it hits its target, then everybody around it maybe makes a dex save of some kind. And if they fail that dex save, they get hit by some splattered lava. And then you decide how much you want that to be. You want that to be 2d6, 2d8, whatever damage, because they just got hot lava on them. That could be pretty devastating. So, as a DM, feel free to do something like that. It's your game, it's your table. You can use the rules you want to use and ignore the ones that you don't care very much for. Just make sure that you're consistent in that, and that your players are aware of what monsters can do. What I'm trying to say is, don't throw them up against something that you know is going to be deadly to them without giving them fair warning first. Have them, somebody knows that the tactics of fire giants are, they could scoop up some of that lava and hurl it at us, and it might splatter and hit us with lava. And then that could inform how their tactics are when they're going to fight it. Don't wait until the first time it hurls that at it for them to be, it can do that? Because that would be, that's a little bit of a Bush League thing to do as a DM, I think. All right, so now where would you place your fire giants in your campaign? So fire giants have ambitions to recapture bygone glories, and in published campaigns, they're almost always depicted as being crafters, builders, and military tacticians. So now, thinking about the current edition, Storm King's Thunder was one of the published campaigns from a couple of years ago. In that particular campaign, fire giants are out to steal the primordial fire elemental known as Maegra from the dwarves at Gauntlgrim, and they want to use that primordial fire elemental to create a great iron golem on the scale of a giant. And to accomplish this, they have alliances with drow and access to powerful magic items. And so part of the plot, when the party goes in and infiltrates that place, they're trying to stop the fire giants from being able to do that. Then if you go all the way back to original D&D, one of the most famous adventures of all time, or adventure series of all time from D&D. It's the mythical Against the Giants. And Against the Giants, fire giants are depicted as allied with the drow and with a red dragon. And in that particular series of adventures, fire giants are the linchpin that holds together an alliance of giants that has seen them spread destruction and havoc across the region of the world of Greyhawk, and only by destroying these fire giants can the threat of the giants be ended to the region. So that's something to keep in mind. You can go to these old classic, old and newer classic adventures as ideas for how you can use fire giants in your campaigns. And riff off of the ideas that they have presented in those adventures. All right, so reskinning the monster. Now, normally, if we're looking at a monster that's kind of a single type of monster, I'll talk about the ways you can reskin it. But in the case of giants, where you have this whole array of giants in the game already, I think one of the most effective reskinning tools is simply swapping around stat blocks. So, like, if you're putting a party in like a cold area, and you need, and it would be really effective to have a frost giant, but the frost giant is the wrong CR. Well, look at the other kinds of giants. Maybe the stat block for a fire giant gives you the right CR to make the encounter as difficult as you want to make it. And then if that's the case, just reskin the stat block of the fire giant as a frost giant, swap off the special abilities, and instead of making it immune to fire, well, now it's immune to cold. And instead of having the ability to survive in extremely hot conditions, well, now it's immune to any kind of cold attacks that you do, and all of those types of things. So this again goes back to that whole spectrum of the giants, from the simple brute hill giants on one end to the magical cloud giants on the other end, and then the 4 elemental giants in between. All right, and now let's see. Let's go to time for the Q&A. All right, I'm looking at the chat, and I don't see that we have any questions right at the moment. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go into the wrap-up real quickly. If you do have any questions on fire giants, let me know, and then we'll spend a few minutes taking a look at those. All right, so tonight, Monster Monday has been all about the history of fire giants. I've been your host, DM Gallibond, and in addition to this weekly stream, there's 3 other live streams that I do, along with players in actual play games. On Sunday afternoons, we do our long-running 5e campaign. That's a planeswalking campaign, Walker of Waterdeep. On Thursday evenings, we do the Sword Coast Chronicles, where we are doing a survey of the different published 5th edition campaigns. And then on Saturday nights, we are doing a 2nd edition Saturday Night Greyhawk campaign. We are adventuring in the world of Greyhawk, and we are doing some of the classic adventures that appear in that setting. Right now, we are going through the original Temple of Elemental Evil. We're on session 4 of that game. All those games are pretty fun, and so they're all streamed on 3 different platforms. We're now streaming on Twitch, on YouTube, and on Facebook as well. So you can find us on any of those particular platforms that you might want to check out. Okay, let's go back and take a look. All right, I don't see any questions, so I will go ahead and I will say thank you guys for hanging out and watching. Hope that you have a wonderful week. I'm going to put this over on the end credits, and then I am going to have a look-see at the small streamer community and find out if anyone else that's part of the small streamer community is running any kind of fun things tonight. And if they are, I will go ahead and get you over to them. Okay. Yeah. Attack Rat is doing some art. So Attack Rack is always a fun stream to go check out. So let's go ahead and we will raid Attack Rack. Right. So hey Amish, thanks for hanging out. You have a good week as well. Okay, and just a few seconds. We'll get you on your raid. Okay, guys, take care. Have a wonderful week, and we will talk to you next Monday, if not before. Good night, everybody.